So I heard Dr. Paul Epstein speak that day at the New York Naturopathic Conference, and I thought, this guy gets it. This guy has been doing it for a long time. He understands the mind-body piece. And so I had to have him to speak at that. So if you would, Dr. Paul Epstein is a naturopathic doctor from Connecticut. He's been doing this for a long time. He's an expert in mind-body medicine. And he's going to here to talk about a little bit about that. Thank you for being here, Dr. Epstein. Can I have a round of applause for him?
Thank you. Does this one work? Okay, I'll just get started here.
From the same table at the same time.
Thank you, James, for inviting me. Kelly is a hard act to follow, and I did everything that she said, so I'm happy to be here to sort of perhaps go deeper into some of the aspects that she mentioned, and particularly in the area of stress in mind-body medicine.
For people at home, can you speak into the mic?
Sure.
That's how they hear it then.
Okay, got it. I'd like to start by the statement that kind of guides my practice as a naturopathic doctor, and as James said, our philosophy is getting a comeback, which is quite simple. Treat the whole person, treat the cause, and treat the person as well as the disease, and more fully engage the patient in their own healing journey, because the source for healing comes from inside the patient, and whatever medicines we prescribe are designed to help the mind and body work better, whatever ailments or issues we're treating or preventing. So the phrase is, disease tells a story not just of your cells, but of yourself. And this is the context, I think Carolyn Mace first mentioned it, of treating one's biography and one's biology. So I want to talk about how our biography becomes our biology, and the importance of listening to both stories. The stories of our individual biochemistry and our nutrition and our diet and our lifestyle, and the story of ourself. And I want to share with you, kind of guide you in an evolutionary process of how I came to understand this and how I practice, based on the studies and the research and the evolution of stress in mind-body medicine over the past 40 years or so. So like the elephant in the room of stress is a factor in the same way that everyone knows it causes disease and it isn't necessarily dealt with, just as everyone knows exercise may be the best therapy for depression, but are people running and getting their endorphins moving and their brain activated in that way? So a few simple studies in the sense of evolution. I was in school and studying stress, and I hear 75 to 90% of visits to the family doctor are for stress-related complaints. That's the American Academy of Family Physicians. Then the Stress Institute says 80% of illness has either a stress-induced etiology or stress will exacerbate that. Now, I'm in naturopathic school and I'm wondering, okay, so that seems to be the main modality that I need to focus on, even though we are practitioners of natural medicine with that philosophy, homeopathy, nutrition, Chinese medicine, herbs. My focus was on the patient's mind, their consciousness, their emotions, and as the science is evolving, as was shared, relaxation and meditation may be the most powerful anti-inflammatories that we have available, with the latest scientific studies about the effects of mindfulness on the cellular level. That's the context for me of connecting the cell and the self. The American Psychological Association does yearly surveys, and they have termed stress an epidemic, and children as young as 8 years old are already exhibiting physical, mental, emotional symptoms of stress at 8. What I'm speaking about is the trauma of life and the stress in our lives now, of our own lives, and turning on the TV and finding out what's happening, unfortunately, with mudslides and earthquakes and the whole 9 yards of the challenge of modern life and the stress. And the real question, as Kelly shared, how are we adapting? What are our adaptive mechanisms? And if we've adapted in a healthy, positive way and dealt with that stress effectively, we have much less chance of that causing illness later on. But if our stress in our life today wasn't enough, there was a study done by Kaiser Permanente called the ACE study, Adverse Childhood Events, where they concluded that children growing up in dysfunctional homes, children who were living with some abuse or abandonment or neglect or enmeshment or alcoholic homes or divorce or domestic violence or some form of trauma that was in their life on a daily basis, not locked in your closet, not necessarily simply, not simply, but just one event of trauma, but a life of trauma, that was a predictor of chronic disease later in life. That was a predictor of healthcare costs skyrocketing, a predictor of morbidity and mortality and the development of heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and all of the chronic symptoms that we have. Based on what we carry, the body bears the burden, because if we don't process it, if we don't adapt properly, we carry it. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. And when I say mind, body, they're not different. They're the whole person. So I don't think of the mind separate from the body or the body separate from the mind. So in that context, the process of how we adapt as a child, each of us in our own way, the fight-flight syndrome, which is our savior in the context of how we were learning biologically to respond to stress, actually becomes the source of our illness because it's overworked. And my sense of inflammation as a disease is how we get conditioned. The context of psychoneuroimmunology beyond understanding stress, that the brain and the immune system were connected. Robert Ader found that out by learning that you can teach the immune system to immunosuppress in the experiment that he did. What does that mean? That means the immune system learns and it's conditioned. If it's conditioned in an immunosuppressive way, over time, the combination of environment and stress and genetics, and you put that together and boom, they're in doctors' offices from the context of those aspects being forming the underlying cause. And the reason I specialize in this is not because all of our other treatments, functional, naturopathic, holistic, conventional, is that this aspect I have found in my over 30 years of practice is the one that's addressed least. And this is beyond stress management, which I hope you'll appreciate. There's another book I wanted to share which is called Scared Sick, which talks about fear and the neurobiological effects of growing up and living with fear. Living with the tension and the fear of life today, even if we're pretty healthy. That fear has its effect on our immune system, on our adaptive mechanisms in the body, and to me that's how we get thrown off. And so we want to look deeper at helping the person look inside to understand their stress, how they've adapted, and teaching them new ways. That if it's conditioned and we learned how to adapt that way, both in biography and biology, we can reverse that. That's the exciting thing. And now, we've known for years that meditation and yoga and relaxation is good and lowers blood pressure and it helps your immune system. Now we're understanding the mechanisms. It cultivates molecular resilience, cellular resilience, the most important skill and tool we need on the cellular level and the level of the self to respond to stress. It's just teaching how to people a different way to adapt. And not that how they adapt was bad or wrong, that was survival. And I'll share a little bit about my story to understand the nature of that in the context of if stress in our life today wasn't a challenge, and stress that we carry from childhood wasn't a challenge. The New York Times last week came out with a study, and this is more of epigenetic understanding. We inherit stress. We carry it from one generation to the next. And one of the studies shows that Holocaust survivors are more likely to suffer from post-traumatic stress and mental emotional pathology, even if they don't have stress in their childhood, simply from being part of that environment in the family, just as children of alcoholics may end up carrying certain characteristics, behavioral characteristics, emotional characteristics, physical characteristics, the allergies, the irritable bowel syndrome, the anxiety, the depression. However we treat it functionally also has a mind-body component to look at on the level of the self and one's biography. The healing of this is mind-body medicine, is the component to add, not by itself, in addition to every other aspect of functional medicine, to explore mind-body medicine and listening to the cell and the self, the diagnosis and the person's life. So one quick example, in the interest of time, the weight loss industry. And we all know about better nutrition and better hormonal and the metabolic syndrome and food allergies and a whole host of ways that we have to integrate functionally with good support for the body. And I know Metagenics, and where Jeff Bland is coming from, has wonderful products that support us with that. But over the course of my 30-year career, I see patients continually who come to me to lose weight. And I'm not the first. I'm usually the last person that they came to. A, because I'm a naturopath. B, because I may have helped someone else. And I'll say, Mrs. Jones, why do you want to lose weight? Now, losing weight was not hard for that person because they lost and gained and lost and gained and lost and gained about 20 times. The recidivism rate, the study, is 90%. This is how I understand mind-body medicine, because they did the diet and they did the exercise and they lost the weight, but they didn't keep it off. Not because the diet and exercise wasn't appropriate, because there was an aspect that was not fully addressed. And Mrs. Jones says to me, well, I'm fat and ugly, I hate myself, because that's how she feels about herself after 20 years of losing and gaining and losing and gaining. And I will say to her, look, I mean, I as a naturopath might be able to give you a little better diet, more individualized and biochemical individuality, maybe better supplements than Nutrisystem and Diet Center and what you heard on Oprah. But before I do that, imagine, in terms of attitude and perspective, that we approach losing weight from the point of view of, I'll help you lose weight when we explore, Dr. Epstein, I want to lose weight because I love myself. Not to get rid of the fat or the weight, because maybe it's there for a reason. This is, again, another aspect of the mind-body connection. To look for the meaning, the message, the opportunity of illness. In addition to the clinical, therapeutic, mind-body medicine is exploring people's attitude and relationship to it. One of the tools that I use, in addition to mindfulness and imagery and counseling and naturopathic treatments, is asking people to look inside and listen. Let's explore this thing that you're hating and trying to get rid of. Maybe it has a purpose. Maybe it's there for a reason. Let's just see. Not to say that we don't also need to do diet, nutrition, and exercise and functional medicine, but maybe there's something else. And this actually transformed my practice, because I was learning guided imagery at the time, and I said to the client, let an image form that represents your fat that you've been hating and trying to get rid of, and it keeps coming back. And the image of a down comforter came. Her fat was her adaptive response to having been abused as a child. It made her feel safe and protected, and every time she lost weight, which was great on the one hand to get rid of it, on the other there was a part of it that felt helpless and scared. And so the process of bringing together both the best medicine with, what is this fat about? Who are you as a self? What's your biography? Not it's your fault, but what's your relationship to it? And there's a poem from Rilke that I'd like to share with you, which is quite meaningful for me, which is, perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses waiting to see us act just once with beauty and courage. Perhaps everything that frightens us is, in its deepest essence, a part of us that feels helpless and needs our love. In the same way that we can track the pathway on the cellular level, in the way that we saw on the slides, in terms of depression and environmental toxins and digestive microbes, going down to how it's affecting methylation and how it's affecting mitochondrial resilience. We can trace the pathway of the biography of what happened to them. And that needs to be integrated in practice. I want to share with you, there was a book on the impact of early childhood trauma on health and disease. And this is what they wrote. There is now ample evidence from the preclinical and clinical fields that early childhood trauma has both dramatic and long-lasting effects on neurobiological systems and functions that are involved in different forms of psychopathology as well as on health in general. Traumatic events of the earliest years of infancy and childhood are not lost, but like a child's footprint in wet cement, are often preserved lifelong. Time does not heal the wounds that occur in those earliest years. Time conceals them. They are not lost, they are embodied. That was Dr. Felitti who did the adverse childhood events study. And I've seen that my entire career, and now I'm doing mentoring of doctors and naturopaths and physicians and therapists to integrate mind-body. And I don't teach them mindfulness. I don't teach them imagery. I don't teach them internal family system psychotherapy until they look inside themselves and face their own truth and their own wounded, because we're all wounded healers. And so on that front, I just want to tell a quick story about my mom, who passed away at 90 after a number of years with Alzheimer's. And as she was losing her awareness of who I was as her son and my sister as her daughter, we interviewed her and we got her recipe for chicken soup. And it was a very detailed interview and recipe and pages and pages of chicken soup, which, as you know, is the #1 healer when you get chicken soup from your mom. And so talking about it is a healing process for me. But when she passed away, we went to our home, and I said to my sister, let's make Mom's chicken soup for the last time. We had her whole pots and pans and her butcher and everything that was needed there. And we proceeded to make our soup, and we had all the ingredients. It was a good soup. But it was, something was missing. There was a missing ingredient. My mother wasn't in that soup. Her consciousness, her whatever she did, because her soup tasted the same every Friday night for my whole life growing up. And we had the ingredients. And I see patient after patient coming into my office with fantastic ingredients in their soup. I can't do better. Important ingredients that are needed in the soup. We don't throw the soup out because it's not working, but they'll say, I went to this, I tried the Acumen, it didn't work. I tried this, it didn't work, because something might be missing. You need to be in your soup, your consciousness, your awareness. Einstein said you can't solve a problem with the same consciousness that created it. As soon as that client, Mrs. Joan, recognized that her fat was her friend, not her enemy, that her fat was protecting her, and there was something underneath that felt helpless and needed love, and I could support her to engage in that healing process, then whatever she had in her soup till then, whatever I might add to her in her soup on a mind-body level, on a functional medicine level, that's, to me, that's the ingredient that is important. The other story to share that's important in terms of my work and mental health was my dad, who was a soldier in World War II and suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. So he came home a hero, except he had nightmares and anxiety and depression and rage at times. I'm growing up. Nobody's talking to me about it. Nobody's talking to him about it until after he passes away, and I find out the truth that he stormed the beaches of Normandy. Now, I didn't storm the beaches of Normandy, but I remember looking in his eyes and seeing terror in there at moments when he was anxious and scared, and James shared the issue of his dad and that experience. And what stayed with me, again, telling a long story short in the interest of time, my dad died on the operating table having bypass surgery. Not that he didn't need a cardiologist. Not that he didn't need bypass surgery. His arteries were clogged. He had lots of inflammation, and it wasn't cholesterol. You know, it was the stress, the trauma of war that had lived in him. And I'm sure he went to doctors continually, and nobody ever addressed that in that way. So in my work, I don't want to help people bypass the truth of their life in a way that maybe we're missing the real ingredient for the meaning and the message of their symptom and the illness. The good news is, both functionally and mind-body medicine, why James Gordon at the Center for Mind-Body Medicine works with trauma victims, works with veterans, doing group support, meditation, mindfulness, imagery, but mostly the person engaging, because most of our stress is what might be called experiential avoidance. Why mindfulness is so powerful, however it works on the cellular level or to relax us, lower blood pressure, how it works is we're fundamentally shifting our relationship to our experience from pushing it away and trying to get rid of it to being willing to be with it. And we're finding now that that being with it is actually what the healing is, which we'll come to momentarily. So just a quick rundown. Some of it was already mentioned in mind-body medicine. We start with Hans Selye, and the fight-flight stress response, the adaptive stress response. Benson at Harvard, which was mentioned, John Kabat-Zinn, and all of the research showing the efficacy of mind-body medicine. Dan Siegel, interpersonal neurobiology, mirror neurons. When you are with your patient with a loving energy, healing happens. So I ask 3 questions in closing in my work with my clients. 3 living questions. Integrating healing and curing. Helping them into wholeness. Helping them touch with mercy their truth and their pain. Helping them see the liberating experience of facing painful truth, which the body-mind is carrying. 3 questions are: narrative medicine. What's your bio? What happened to you? Tell me your story. Just that is therapeutic. Not your self story, your self story. Integrated with the self. Second question, are you willing to look inside and listen to the parts of you that may be speaking? Are you willing to listen to your fat, your headache, your stomach ache, your backache, your irritable bowel, and explore what might be there? Third question, not what do we do to get rid of it, not how do we fix it, not even how do we cure it. How do we be with it with love? Because that ends up being the healer, facing our difficult truth. So thank you all. It was a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.